This week on The Other Side, let us do our jobs. Nurses and paramedics call for a cut to the number of health department overlords that they've got to report to so they can get on with their jobs and money isn't wasted on government inefficiency. An Olympic oversized controversy has erupted over that opening ceremony. We'll explain what all the fuss is about and whether people are just overreacting.
If it is not an attack on the Last Supper, why did your main character, Barbara Butch, have on Instagram, which has now been removed, a painting of the Last Supper saying, oh yes, we have achieved our goal, the gay New Testament?
A commentator gets fired for a lame joke in a ridiculous overreaction. Our energy expert, Ben Beattie, joins us to explain why nuclear will be far, far cheaper than unreliables. We'll learn about the man who wrote Amazing Grace and how he helped end slavery. And Kamala Harris has an uptick in the polls. Is Trump in trouble?
So when we talk about the work we are doing here together, it is recognizing that and being guided by this principle of what we must do in the spirit and in the interest of equity.
No, we don't all end up in the same place. Some work harder than others, some are smarter than others.
All that and more this week. This is The Other Side. G'day Adelaide, g'day Hobart and g'day Australia. This is episode 322 of The Other Side for the weekend commencing Friday, August the 2nd, 2024. I'm Damien Coury. The Other Side is the weekly show that brings you an analysis and summary of the best bits of news and commentary from the week that was without the woke, bringing you right up to speed in under an hour and having some laughs and inspiration along the way, we hope. We have a bias, we tell you right up front, unlike other news shows, that we are on the sensible centre-right, good old-fashioned classical liberal Aussie values, and we aim to present the other side of most stories and push back against the cultural assumptions of the radical extremists on the left, which underlie so much other news reporting and commentary in the media these days. And we've got a new episode up every Friday night on YouTube at 7 o'clock. Let's go. Well, inflation is up again, now around 4% annualised. It's to be expected, but it means we're unlikely to see any interest rate cuts anytime soon, and we'll probably see further rate rises as we've long predicted on this show. Gee, who knew that if you print money to buy your way through a pandemic, you'll end up devaluing all the existing money in the system and causing inflation? I was struck by an excellent piece by the legendary business writer Robert Gottliebsen in The Australian this week. He notes that in Australia, on average, there's around one health department bureaucrat in administration for every 4.5 professionals actually doing the job of nursing and paramedics. In some states, that ratio is, get this, one admin person for every 3.5 actual practitioners. Now look, admin is needed, of course it is. But the Alternative Nurses Union, the NPAA, says many other countries run at a ratio of one admin person for 10 actual nurses and practitioners. So Australia's system is grossly inefficient, and you, my tax-paying friends, are footing the bill for it. Gottliebsen notes that health costs are rising at a staggering 5.7% a year, almost 2% more than inflation, and are the third biggest inflation booster. He says the NPAA, the Nurses Professional Association of Australia, are putting forward the first practical solution to the dilemma of attracting more people to their profession and getting much higher pay, but without adversely impacting state finances. This is about people at the grassroots of a profession telling their bosses, state governments, how to run the system more effectively at a much lower cost. The nurses and paramedics believe that they are highly qualified professionals and don't need massive bureaucracies that try to tell them what to do in great detail. Gottliebsen also notes that New Zealand has listened to its grassroots nurses and paramedics and has removed the top management layer in the hospital system. I repeat, in one fell swoop, New Zealand has removed an entire layer of top management, appointed a commissioner who will decentralise hospital controls and make them more autonomous. This allows the money to be used to pay nurses and paramedics more and attract more and better professionals. In fact, many of those working in admin used to be practitioners themselves, and they could be deployed on the front line and paid more instead of being retrenched. The NPAA reckons that there's more than $7 billion a year being wasted on excess admin. If that was redeployed, it could totally transform our healthcare system. So what's the barrier? Well, you guessed it, the incumbent big nurses unions, who, as Gottliebsen notes in his piece, have got a large number of their top union representatives holding very high posts in the bureaucracy. So the big unions have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to make any change that would cut back the number of fat cat bureaucrats. So nothing will change until the people realise what's going on and start to vote accordingly. Health professionals can start by perhaps questioning which unions they belong to and what they're actually paying their union fees for. Well, what an Olympic week it has been. She really is the greatest of all time. Jess Fox is the most successful Australian Olympian of all time in individual events, clinching her 6th Olympic medal with her canoe slalom gold medal. It's incredible stuff. Terrific to see Molly O'Callaghan and Ariane Titmus doing it all over again on Friday morning our time with the fantastic win in the 4x200 metre women's freestyle relay. They also picked up, of course, the gold and the silver individually in the women's 200 freestyle. Go St Peter's College in Brisbane, and congratulations to the entire swim team. Amazing stuff. Ariana, of course, getting gold in the 400 metre freestyle earlier in the week. 23-year-old Queenslander Kaylee McEwen in 4th place at the turn in the 100 metre backstroke, and then that incredible late burst in that last 50 to take the gold and the Olympic record. It's just been incredible in the pool, and at time of recording we are at 8 gold medals for Australia overall. Some heartbreaking stuff though in the rugby sevens, if you like the rugby like I do. 2 4th place finishes for Australia in both the men's and the women's in absolutely nail-biting matchups. If you want to watch those matches, incredible. Madison Levi, a true champion nonetheless. Unfortunately, the cultural side of the Olympics in Paris hasn't been so good. Now, I'm not one of these people who thinks the opening ceremony is all that important. It's not the Olympics. The Olympics are a sporting event, not an arts event. So calls to boycott or not watch the Olympics because of what organising committees might allow wacky artists to do with the opening ceremony is a little bit self-defeating, I think. But it was not pretty. These are some of the images that upset people. It was a drag queen fashion catwalk sequence featuring a group of drag queens dancing along a runway, posing in front of a central queen who had a DJ mixing desk in front of her. But it seems that the final scene was deliberately mimicking and ridiculing Leonardo da Vinci's 1498 painting, The Last Supper. Now, the Olympic organisers say no, it was clearly meant to be a feast of Bacchus, or Dionysus, who is the Greek god of wine-making, festivity, religious ecstasy, and theatre. And that is absolutely true to an extent. The guy in blue is clearly meant to be the Greek god Bacchus, or Dionysus. But let's have a look now at Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper and the scene from the opening ceremony together. Well, it certainly looks like it, right? I mean, we could be reading into it. I mean, would any group of people in a line standing behind a table or stage like that with someone in the middle with a crown on sort of look like the Last Supper? Are we Christians being a bit hypersensitive like Muslims who take offence at any criticism of their religion? Should we be this sensitive? Well, one senior American Catholic scholar thinks we absolutely should.
They said it was not a depiction of the Last Supper, but an ancient Greek party called a bacchanal, and that this is what it was portraying. Actually, if you go back and watch it, they portrayed both. First, these drag queens posed in what was almost perfect alignment with the 12 at the dinner table of the Last Supper. In fact, even the positions, the angles of the head, the arms being out were all almost identical if you see the pictures posted next to each other. So I don't know how you could deny that. It is true that after that, Then they went into this promiscuous act of the party called the Bacchanal. And so they actually portrayed both the Last Supper first and then this promiscuous party.
That's the Reverend Chris Aylar, an American Catholic scholar. Now, even if it wasn't depicting the Last Supper, that the idea of a drag queen segment of the opening ceremony is somehow appropriate at a family event like the Olympics, or that sexualizing a 10-year-old in the scene is okay, or a guy having what was claimed to be a wardrobe malfunction that saw his man parts pop out of his shorty shorts to say hello world. To say that is all de rigueur, just routine entertainment and not some salutation to the debauchery of modern culture, is a complete load of merd.
Now, if this is true, all they are saying that it's had nothing to do with the Last Supper, here is your smoking gun. The woman or man, whatever, the person in the middle, I guess a woman because her name was Barbara Butch, that was portraying the Christ-like figure, admitted and had a post on her Instagram account, which has since been removed. And on her Instagram account had the Last Supper painting. So now if this is not about the Last Supper, why did the front and center character, this Barbara Butch, have on Instagram a painting of the Last Supper with the words, oh yes, the new gay testament? It has now been removed. It's been removed since the Olympics have changed their story that this is not an attack on the Last Supper.
There you go. Good question. So, late news is that the French DJ who performed during the Paris Olympics, that Barbara Butch, she is now filing a legal complaint, according to BBC News, after receiving abuse online. I'm not sure how that works in France. I think the police have to investigate and then they go through a process, of course, but she is filing an official legal complaint. Don't know if you can mock people like even Barbara Bush. You're mocking, really, aren't you? The whole thing's a bit of mockery, and not expect that there's going to be a little bit of criticism come back your way. But anyway, the Olympics, you know, they're a celebration of human achievement, right? They are a celebration of hierarchy, of aspiration to models of excellence. And in that way, they are a complete slap in the face to the concept of equity that the globalist left-wing elites, the Elbows and the Kamalas, love so much. They hate the idea that we all, as a community, as a society, benefit when one or two or a few of our tribe are exceptional at something. That hierarchy is actually good and hierarchy is actually natural. That we should strive for equality of opportunity, but never impose equity, the equality of outcome. That is core. That is the principle upon which free market competition and capitalism are built. And it's the reason why countries that adopt capitalism and liberalism thrive and those that adopt socialism fail badly. That idea that we all benefit from the excellence of the few and that equity, equality of outcome would be a disaster for us all, that idea is at the heart of the spiritual message of the Olympic Games, dating all the way back to the ancient Greek games. But in this weird woke world, we perhaps shouldn't be surprised that the French artistic directors of the opening ceremony might want to shove the latest left-wing diabolical fad down our necks. The nonsense of critical gender ideology, a poisonous idea that says people can choose their gender, not just their sexuality, but their gender, is the pinnacle, I think, of Western civilization's rejection of the idea of a divine creator whose creation should be, respected with a little bit of humility, even if you're not a religious person. We've been telling the creator that we know better than them for decades now. But don't get me wrong. I think it's part of the plan that we as humans use our brains and develop science and medicine and move forward. But all of that's got to be done in a humble spirit of awe and mystery, because no matter our achievements in making the world more healthy, more just, more kind, and life more comfortable, we still don't understand the universe, and we all ultimately will still die. Suffering, sickness, and injustice will continue. And as we saw in the 20th century, any man-made attempts to impose equity and fairness, imposed, like centralized big government Marxist socialism, achieve the exact opposite. They achieve tyranny, poverty, mass suffering, and sometimes the deaths of tens of millions of people. I think Russell Brand put it best on his Stay Free show this week.
What's amazing is if you actually read about the Last Supper, it's an opportunity to say that we can live forever in grace if we are willing to sacrifice ourselves and be sacrificed for a higher principle, that we need not endeavor through merit to achieve greatness, for the supreme sacrifice has redeemed us all, and through gratitude we ought live in kindness. If we did live in the kindness suggested in particular at the Last Supper, so casually mocked in that festival of godlessness and commerce and corporatism that's meant to be about celebrating sport and by their own reckoning diversity is the acceptance and love of other people, the acceptance that there is no tribunal but God that can judge others, that we are here to serve and love one another. All of it's taken care of in the Last Supper.
Exactly. Even if you're an atheist and you just look at the Last Supper as a mythology or a story, it is a story with an incredible amount of depth to it in its message. It's truly astounding. Is it any wonder it's a target of the sad postmodern relativism of the modern left? Back to Russell's very good explanation.
All of it's taken care of in the Last Supper, as well as in Mark, at least, Christ saying, it's going to be crazy. You lot are going to deny me. You're going to betray me. You're going to live in extraordinary ways. You're going to lose touch with your principles. There's so much prophecy in the Gospels. There is so much wisdom in the teaching of Christ, but it is in his death and resurrection that what we are offered is a different way of living. We are offered a way of living in awakened enlightenment and love and service. And I will say this again because this is what I think is the main point. If you actually follow Jesus and surrender to Jesus, you don't need a culture telling you to treat people fairly and with love and to not condemn or judge them, because that is Christ's key point. Love one another.
By the way, you may not be a Christian or a religious person, but it's actually not scientific, rational, or smart anymore to deny a creator or designer of the universe. A thing called the fine-tuning theory has kind of solved that question for us. It's quite radical and out there nowadays to think this perfectly fine-tuned system we live in is all random. Atheism just isn't cool or very wise anymore. So maybe, Paris Olympic people, having just a little respect, even if you're not religious, even if you are an atheist, for the symbolism of the religion upon which our entire culture in the West was founded, Christianity, even if you're an atheist, might be a wise, kind, mature, and sensible thing to do. And that's the point. Mockery of sacred things isn't good, especially of something as sacred as the Last Supper. I should point out that France itself has long been a very important home of many things Christian and Catholic throughout history. One of the most popular, well-known online senior Catholic clerics is American Bishop Robert Barron. And he gave this critique, which landed hundreds of thousands of views online, and emphasized the historical importance of France in the Christian tradition.
France felt evidently, as it's trying to put its best cultural foot forward, the right thing to do is to mock this very central moment in Christianity where Jesus, at his Last Supper, gives his body and blood in anticipation of the cross. And so it's presented, though, as this gross, sort of flippant mockery. France, which used to be called the eldest daughter of the church, Paris, that gave us, Thomas Aquinas taught there, and Vincent de Paul was there, King Louis IX, St. Louis, France that sent Catholic missionaries all over the world. France, whose culture, and I mean the honoring of the individual and of human rights and of freedom, is grounded very much in Christianity, felt the right thing to do was to mock the Christian faith.
Bishop Barron also posed a rather obvious question in all of this.
Would they ever have dared mock Islam in a similar way? Would they ever have dreamed of mocking in this gross, public way a scene from the Quran? As I say, we all know the answer to that. I think, folks, what's interesting here is this deeply secularist postmodern society knows who its enemy is. They're naming it. And we should believe them. They're telling us who they are. We should believe them. But furthermore, we Christians, we Catholics should not be sheepish. We should resist. We should make our voices heard.
As I said, many of the French themselves were not happy about it. Remember, this is a country that very nearly elected a conservative government just a couple of weeks ago. So upset were people that the Games organising officials held a news conference about it to give a kind of non-apology apology.
Clearly, there was never an intention to show disrespect to any religious group. On the contrary, I think that Thomas Joly really tried to really intend to celebrate community tolerance. That was his word yesterday. And looking at the result of the polls that we shared, we believe that this ambition was achieved. If people have taken any offense, we are, of course, really, really sorry.
So much wrong with that as an apology, I don't know where to start. It got worse. The justification began very soon after that lame apology. The artistic director of the opening ceremony, Thomas Joly, spoke in French. Apologies to non-French speaking podcast listeners to this show. This short clip has subtitles for our viewers.
Ma volonté n'est pas d'être subversif, ni de me moquer, ni de choquer. Ma volonté est simplement de dire que nous sommes ce grand nous. En France, on a le droit de s'aimer comme on veut, avec qui on veut. En France, on a le droit de croire ou de ne pas croire. En France, on a le droit, on a beaucoup de droits, voilà. Et c'était l'idée de faire transparaître ces valeurs-là à travers la cérémonie.
Basically, he's saying he didn't intend to be subversive or to mock or shock. That's a point-blank lie. Sorry, I'm not buying it, Thomas. You're one of Europe's top musical theatre artistic directors. You know all about mocking and shocking and how it's done. And nothing happens in a show like that that isn't crafted and staged to the last fingernail positioning. He then goes on to give the usual blah-blah postmodernist relativist blanket statements that can justify anything. A bit like a French Kamala Harris in a way. He says, quote, "In France, we can believe or not believe. In France, we're allowed to love who we want to, how we want. In France, we have a lot of rights." And I wanted to convey those throughout the ceremony. Well, Thomas, here's the thing. It's the French who are annoyed with you. And it's not you demonstrating enlightened Western values to the oppressed communist or Muslim worlds. It's you mocking Western Christian Enlightenment values themselves. And this is what the modern left don't get. Our enlightenment, freedom, and liberty comes with responsibility, because freedom without maturity and responsibility and humility leads to decadence and debauchery and the end of civilization and tyranny rather than the flourishing of civilization. Let me just repeat that. Freedom without maturity and responsibility and humility leads to tyranny, decadence, and debauchery and the end of civilization rather than the flourishing of it. I think all of this has probably been a bit of a good thing, folks, because we've had the opportunity to see up close and personal the whole cultural problem that we've got in the West here. It's not just about left versus right. It's about a very immature, childish culture versus a mature adult culture. That is the cultural battle in the West right now. Freedom has a price. That's why children have to listen to their parents and take guidance. It's why we should all respect our elders, even when we disagree with them. We should doubt ourselves. We should have humility. We should study history and the great classics of the past, the Western canon. We should read those books before we start trying to change the world or change society. So maybe, just maybe, while we should be accepting and understanding of differences and diversity, that doesn't mean that we have to promote and fully embrace certain things. And I, for one, as open-minded as I like to think I am about human sexuality, I will never think that fat, bearded men dressed in traditional female clothing that is hypersexual, dancing in a hypersexual way in front of children is a good thing, or that it has any place at a global sporting event. Because it's not inclusive, it's highly exclusive of basic human decency. And you can catch us here on The Other Side every Friday night from 7 p.m. on YouTube. If you'd like to support us, the best way is to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. It's free. Just hit the subscribe button and the little bell too, and that'll notify you when we post anything. The little bell's very important. Also, if you're feeling generous, feel free to send us a super thanks donation. You can do that by clicking the little $ thanks icon under the video frame on YouTube. You can also follow us on X, Twitter, at The Other Side on X, The Other Side on X. It all helps. I often have people ask me, do you really think all this woke stuff is so bad, Damo? Do we really need to be concerned about it and going on about woke, woke, woke all the time? Well, yeah, we do, unfortunately, because woke is not a myth or something that just emerged or popped into our culture by accident. What is woke exactly? Well, it's got a real name. It's Neo-marxist identity politics. It's a specific worldview that came up through academia over many decades, and it's often referred to as evolving from a thing called critical theory. That seeks to view everything in terms of oppression, right? There's oppressors and oppressed, and that way we can get the oppressed on side, get them to support our politics, vote for our party, and then we can get control, right? So this politics of oppression, but it's done in woke under the lines of race, gender, and sexuality, okay? It's left-wing because it aligns with socialism and communism theories, the philosophies that want big government and believe that the role of government is not just to play referee and leave everybody alone and be as small as possible, but to be as big as possible and actually make life fair, to enforce equity. That is the opposite of true classical liberalism, which believes that society will prosper and all people will be better off, richer, healthier, happier, if the government is small and just backs off and lets people who know what they're doing in certain areas of life get on with the job of succeeding and failing and learning and succeeding again in a free market, right? So everyone in society ends up doing the jobs and roles that they personally have the talents for, that they can do best, and that will add the most value to their fellow citizens because they'll get paid the most, rewarded the most in our system if they focus on those things that add value for other people. How nice, right? So woke really does matter because it's damaging that. Right now it's being used to demand that people are being given jobs over other people, not based on their talent or their ability or their merit, but on whether or not they've got the right skin color, the right private parts, and the right sexual tendencies to balance out the workforce according to the way the world should be, according to the neo-Marxists and their governments. The 20th century taught us which system works and which one doesn't. But we haven't learned, weirdly enough. People are generally pretty dumb, it appears, and as a species, we have very short memories, it seems. We're still easily persuaded by nice-sounding, hollow catchphrases from politicians like Kamala Harris. Woke has entered the workplace in a big way. I've had many old expatriates like me who lived overseas for a while come back to Australia. We lived in communist countries and perhaps other less free parts of the world. Have come back home to Australia and say things like, and I hear this all the time from expats, oh wow, I felt more free in Hong Kong or Singapore or China or the Middle East than I do here in Australia these days. And it's a surprise to us because the Australia we left is not the same as the Australia we've come back to. This is because if you don't toe the line at work in most Australian corporations and foreign big corporations operating in Australia now on this diversity, equity and inclusion itself derived from critical theory, the concept of equity is not a good concept, it's not a good thing, then your career, if you don't buy into the DEI, is going nowhere. So you are literally gagged. Like people can't talk. I get emails all the time, LinkedIn posts, tweets, direct messages saying, you know, I'd love your show, would love to be able to speak out on this. I can't say this at work, I can't talk about that. So we're gagged as Aussies now. Not only that, we're very near the next step, as Jordan Peterson calls it, forced speech. We very nearly are being forced to say sing off the script, right? To sing the Communist Party song and salute that trans rainbow flag. I was at a university, a Catholic university actually, the other day, and I noticed in the library there were like 6 different flags. The Australian flag was one of them, but there were plenty of flags that we're supposed to not, you know, we're supposed to respect these flags. Otherwise, you're a bad person and you're out of a job and a work life and an income and putting food on the table for your family. So this isn't funny. It's not just about acceptance of other races, genders and sexualities anymore, which is a good thing. No, that's not enough. If you refuse to wave that rainbow flag, you're looking down the barrel of a career dead end. And life is grim if you're not in any of these so-called oppressed groups, as deemed by the identity politics radical extremists. Which brings me to the story of this bloke, Bob Ballard. Bob was a popular commentator for Eurosport. Lovely bloke. Eurosport hold the rights in that part of the world for the Olympic Games, and Bob was having a happy start to his day at work.
Good morning, hello world, welcome back to Paris, the La Défense Arena for day 2 of swimming. Lizzie Simmons is working so hard alongside me with all the prep and all the data and all the stats. She'll show me up, of course, in the next couple of hours we go live.
Eurosport commentator Bob Ballard on day 2 of the swimming at the Olympics, saying hi to his fans on Twitter before his workday started. Then we had the big race where Australia's super women relay team, they took gold. And after it, while live on air, Bob made this little joke.
Well, the women just finishing off. You know what women are like, hanging around, you know, doing the makeup.
Outrageous, Bob. Some of the men are doing that as well.
But doing the makeup. Yeah.
So what he said there was, the women are just finishing off, you know, what women are like, hanging around, doing the makeup. That was it. An old school sexist joke. Maybe a little bit dated and out of place in 2024. Bit Benny Hill for our day, but hardly grossly offensive. You know, a bit like women teasing men for being a bit dopey or making endless doofus dad jokes that we have on TV all the time. And afterwards, I mean, the genders teasing each other about gender things is, you know, it's funny and it's been going on for centuries. After he said this, his co-host put him right in his place, as she should have, and she said, "That's outrageous, Bob," and they had a bit of a laugh. And they moved on, right? Normal banter, live television. Not everything's perfect in live television, that's for sure. Let's just listen to it again.
Well, the women just finishing off. You know what women are like, hanging around, you know, doing the makeup.
Outrageous, Bob. Some of the men are doing that as well.
But doing the makeup. Yeah.
Now, this should be nothing, right? This shouldn't be a news story. I shouldn't be wasting my time and your time sitting here talking about it. But why do we have to? Because a bunch of hypersensitive brats protested this great offence to the woke gods, and Eurosport responded by laughing it off as a minor indiscretion, apologising to all women, and asking Bob to watch his banter in the future. Yeah, no, that's actually not what Eurosport did. What they did to Bob was they took away his livelihood and the career that he loves and has worked in for decades. The bastards fired him. They fired Bob Ballard over that. And that, folks, is why, no, we cannot take woke as a joke. It's very serious stuff, especially if you happen to be a straight white man over 40. If you think this isn't so bad here in Australia, this culture, think again. Winner of the Double Standards Award for this week goes to the truly delightful Laura Mazier, an Aussie journalist at the trashy try-hard hipster website Pedestrian TV and Pedestrian Daily. Not only was she gleefully reporting the disgraceful overreaction of Eurosport in firing Ballard, she hypocritically described him in her article as a wrinkly old white man. Clearly, it's a shitty and inherently sexist comment to make about any woman, let alone a group of elite athletes who just won gold on the world stage at the effing Olympics. She used the full word, by the way. It also really gets under my skin that this wrinkly old white man really wanted to rush along a moment that the entire team would be working tirelessly for 4 years. Yeah, nah, get over yourself, Laura. He wasn't rushing them. He was simply making a quick joke that was a bit off taste and probably not suitable for this day and age. So come down off that fake moral high ground of a 20-something virtue signalling fool. It was a lame joke. And where's the kindness and compassion of the left? We hear about, oh, they're so kind and compassionate. No kindness or compassion for this old bloke, or dare I say it, respect in any way for an elder. So Bob Ballard gets fired for a bad joke made off the cuff during a live in real time broadcast, a slip of the tongue that he probably regrets, and which was no worse than an old-fashioned Benny Hill joke. But this young writer, Actually, she's pushing 30 now, so it might be time to grow up a bit now. She delivers a deliberate, premeditated slur that is the full triple whammy. Racist, sexist, and ageist. Right? Wrinkly old white guy. And she still has a job? We truly live in a clown world. Is it possible that despite Peter Dutton's plan to fast-track nuclear energy in Australia, our electricity market is so dysfunctional that there are almost no good options available to us? That it's not a choice between disaster and blackouts under wind and solar unreliables versus abundant power and happiness through nuclear, but rather a choice between a total disaster and just a slightly less awful bad state of affairs. Electrical engineer and other side energy commentator Ben Beattie says the glimmer of sanity behind a state-owned nuclear power company is probably the best shot we've got at a low-cost, secure energy future. It'd be cheapest, he argues, if we just had full-scale, unapologetic return to coal. But that's not going to happen in the current political climate, with so much billionaire wealth being poured into unreliables like wind and solar. So Ben argues that an expensive taxpayer-funded jaunt down the yellow cake road makes a kind of sense. Ben Beattie joins me now from Brisbane. Ben, thanks a lot for your time again. Good to have you back.
G'day, Damien.
Mate, this is bad news for libertarians and free market-loving classical liberals, but you don't think that the private sector can save the electricity system. Why not?
No, you're right, Damien. I don't think it can. I don't think the private sector ever had a chance. We've had renewable energy targets since the early 2000s, and successive governments have ramped up the market distortions to the point where the only investment that makes sense to return a profit to shareholders is something that gets a seat at the table, qualifies for the subsidies. And I think we need to face the reality that a government with, low cost of capital, long investment horizons, and I think more importantly, a mission to reset the electricity system to something that's dominated by baseload, which is predictable and reliable. I think that's the only logical path to low-cost retail electricity. There's no path to lower electricity bills through a system built on the back of small, dispersed, intermittent, weather-dependent generators. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so yeah, well, certainly not with the unreliables, but even with nuclear, you're saying, of course, that government will have lower cost of capital. It has those, as you said, long investment horizons, so it can invest for the long haul, more than private businesses would probably. And we've got to have that sort of centralised management to ensure that we have that reliable baseload delivery of electricity, right?
Yeah, 100%. And we've got the problem where you've got the states. Obviously, everyone knows they're all a Labor government, so they're going to oppose anything a federal LNP government decides to do. And you might get the same reaction if the tables were turned, if all the states were Liberal and the federal government was Labor. But it looks like we may have a possibility of a federal LNP going up against the states. Now, I think as soon as, say, for example, Peter Dutton gets in, Ted O'Brien becomes the energy minister, and they start trying to do this stuff, reset the system to baseload dominated, which I think is the only sensible option. The Labor states, the opposition states, will gleefully chime in and call them climate deniers and, market wrecking, big government, all the rest of it. It'll all happen, and they will oppose it at every step. So I think there's going to be some intervention somewhere which resets it.
Yeah, it's just a tragic situation that we just can't get organised. But as you say, I mean, we can't take out coal, which provides the base load power that we need and that reliability, and replace that with the unreliable energy from wind and solar. And I call them unreliables instead of renewables, not because I'm trying to be smart or clever or, be propagandist like the left are in changing language, but because it's closer to the truth, right? I mean, it's just true. These are not reliable power sources because they are dependent upon the weather conditions, and we just can't rely on them for baseload. And they're not really renewable either, right? Which is the other reason I don't like using the term renewables. You wrote something pretty interesting in your Spectator article though, mate, about rooftop solar that I didn't realise. It is actually the largest electricity source on the grid.
So when they're on, they're basically all on, and there's no control of that output. You can't turn it down, you can't turn it up. It just dumps its electricity into the grid, a lot of the time with some fat feed-in tariffs, of which I'm actually a beneficiary. So I feel comfortable saying that we should get rid of them, because I have benefited from them.
Not in your economic self-interest, right? Yeah. So mate, look, basically that's the shocking thing. But your issue, right, is, sorry to interrupt you, but your issue, just to get to the point, is that you think that that's market distorting, right? That the fact that that is the main source of power, yet we have no control to turn it up or down, is actually affecting the business case or the viability of businesses to provide other forms of energy into the grid.
That's right. It's a market share problem. So with this massive combined generator that has no control, it doesn't respond to market signals. It doesn't respond to anything except clouds and nighttime, to be honest. So that causes periods of abundance in electricity where you see lots of rooftop solar and a low demand day, and lots of rooftop solar is forcing other generators to close and shut down completely during the day. And you have periods of scarcity where they just don't exist at all, which is at a funny coincidence when everyone's getting home from work and turning on their heaters at this time of year, turning on their TVs, their ovens, and the hot water systems get a run too. So this is all genuine technical problems with the solar, and the market share is the economic problem for the baseload generators in general.
Yeah, so it's proving a disincentive for them. So enter Albo's genius energy minister Chris Bowen and his capacity investment scheme, guaranteeing, as socialists love to do, minimum revenue for all generators. So you guys will fix it. We'll make sure that you have a buyer of last resort. That'll be the government, or really the taxpayers, right? So we are committed. And as you say in your article, that kind of mocks the market signals, the consumer bills. It's a bit of a laugh at the way the market should operate. And if these guys are getting overpaid by the state, that's going to just send prices even higher, right?
Well, there's an interesting conundrum here, because what'll happen is if you have too much supply forced into the system and it's got guaranteed revenue, so it's not necessarily responding to the market signal. So it'll offer its product, its electricity, for as low as possible to the market, because it doesn't care, because it's getting propped up by the taxpayer. So it just wants to, I don't know, make a few bucks on the side, and that'll do is it'll drive the wholesale price very, very low. Now, some people look at that and go, "Oh, that's a good thing," but if you talk to anybody who knows, has a few insights about how the market might work to fund a new generator, build a new generator, pay it off over time, very, very low wholesale prices are the opposite of what we want. We want something in the order of somewhere between $70 to $150 a megawatt hour, in that range. But if the capacity investment scheme gets up and you get this massive influx of generators which are paid to stay afloat, they're not really caring what the wholesale price is. The wholesale price will go very, very low, negative most of the time.
Yeah.
What's that do for the rest of the market?
No incentives whatsoever for anybody to get into the market. It just distorts the whole thing and creates a complete mess, as government interference normally does. So nuclear then will not really be able to fix this, but you're saying that a well-managed nuclear system does have to be sort of centralised. Is that going to be cheaper than doing what we're doing now? And I think you've got some pretty amazing statistics, right, based on Chris Bowen's numbers.
A renewables-dominated system has a lot of stuff, a lot of distributed generators, batteries, synchronous condensers, wind and solar farms, electric vehicles, a lot of transmission lines. All that stuff needs to be working, talking together, weather allowing, plus all your backup systems as well, which is your gas and your pumped hydro. That's a lot of physical stuff out there that consumers have to pay for. With a baseload dominated system, you've actually got less stuff.
Yeah, because they want to put the nuclear stations where the existing coal stations are, so you don't have to build all that new infrastructure, or at least a lot less of it, is the point.
That's Peter Dutton's plan. So the predictability of the baseload combined with less stuff to pay for means lower bills for consumers. If the baseload is nuclear, it will be more expensive to build than coal. But if you're concerned about emissions, well, that's the cost you should be willing to bear, right?
Yeah, we're not going back to coal.
If you're not concerned about emissions, I'll put myself firmly in that bucket.
You'd rather we stuck with coal, mate.
Coal is cheaper. Coal has a few issues depending on whether the fuel is linked to global prices.
Okay, now look, we have to wrap up, but just very quickly, Chris Bowen put a figure of $122 billion on that total cost of his plan to get Australia to renewables at 82% level. So 82% renewables by 2030, which is only 6 years away. So 122 billion, he's saying. AEMO is saying it'll cost 373 billion. Why is there that difference between those two numbers?
Well, Chris Bowen's picked out one of the headline figures from AEMO's spreadsheet. It's not a real number. The capital that AEMO expects to spend on generators alone is in the order of ramping up to $15 billion per year, $15 billion per year up to 2040, and then about 20 billion per year after that. And that total comes to 373 billion. The figures to replace all of our coal units with nuclear only comes to 168 billion. So I'd invite someone like AEMO to throw a bit of nuclear in their model and do something which makes a bit of sense for us.
Excuse me, Ben, did you just say that AEMO hasn't done the modelling for nuclear?
No, they haven't done the modelling for nuclear.
Holy cow. Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So the number they've come, I wonder why, actually, why they haven't done it. 373 billion for the plan with unreliables. But if you put nuclear, it goes down to around 186 billion as a projection.
It's less than half.
Yeah, well, you know, these government spreadsheets, you can always double it and add a bit, right? If you want the real cost. But in any case, we know that nuclear is less than half. Ben, we are out of time, but mate, thanks very much for coming back on and explaining all of that to us as well as you always do. Great to chat with you. Ben Beattie, our energy expert and also host of the Baseload podcast, if you want to hear Ben talk about this stuff in a little bit more detail if you're technically minded. You're watching The Other Side, your weekly analysis of the best news and commentary from around the media world without the woke. We put a new show out every Friday night from 7 p.m. on YouTube, and then we put clips from the show out every other night from 7 p.m. on YouTube and X. So you can watch the way you want to watch, either as one whole show for an hour on Friday nights or in shorter clips throughout the week. The main thing is to click the subscribe button on YouTube and the little bell, because the bell is really important to click because it notifies you when the new content is up, so you never miss a thing. Also, if you'd like to support, feel free to send us a super thanks donation. You can do that by clicking the little $sign, the little thanks icon under the video frame on YouTube. We really do need financial support to keep everybody paid and the thing going. You can also follow us on X, Twitter, at The Other Side on X. And please tell your friends about the show. Everything helps. It was Emancipation Day late this week, August the 1st this year, marking the 190th anniversary of the passing in Britain of the Slavery Abolition Act, outlawing the owning, buying and selling of humans as property throughout the then British Empire across the world. It was a huge source of inspiration and hope in the fight against slavery in many other places of the world, like Africa itself, the Middle East and Asia, and of course the United States. Britain was the first. But we're not teaching kids in schools about this amazing aspect of our history because it doesn't fit the narrative of Western world bad, Christian ideals bad, white men bad, etc., etc. In fact, it counters those common misconceptions. The think tank, the Australian Institute for Progress, holds an event to mark the anniversary of the Slavery Abolition Act every year. The AIP's Executive Director, Graham Young, sat down with me at this year's Emancipation Day event to discuss its significance.
A day that's recognised around the world. It started in Trinidad and Tobago, which was obviously a slave economy at some stage, but just 2 years ago, Canada, which had very minor examples of slavery in the eastern provinces, decided to make Emancipation Day a national day, on the 1st of August 1834, the Abolition of Slavery Act came into force, and for the next 50 or more years, the British spent anywhere up to 2% of their GDP trying to eradicate slavery around the world.
So it's really interesting that, because it's not just about Britain. It was the entire British Empire that this applied to, but they went even beyond that in terms of how they tried to reduce the problem of slavery.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples of that is that Brazil was an ally of theirs, because they were always fighting with the Spanish. Brazil's Portuguese, and had a very big slave economy because they were into sugar, and they blockaded Brazil and said, you have to abolish slavery. So they picked on allies as well as enemies. It would have been against their security and economic interests to pick on an ally like that. So yeah, it's an outstanding example of international human rights with some real grunt behind it. You know, a lot of people today talk a good book when it comes to human rights, but they don't actually do anything about it. Most countries don't do anything about it outside their own borders, and even then, most of them aren't all that good within their own borders. But here you've got a country that went out. It was dominant because it had that huge empire and it had a huge naval force to basically keep peace on the waters and ensure that trade could carry forth. And they used that not just for trade purposes, but humanitarian purposes. It was essentially a moral and ethical position. The first people who agitated for it were evangelical Anglican ministers. John Wesley, whose followers subsequently formed the Methodist Church, was one of the first.
This year, the event put the spotlight on a guy named John Newton. He lived from 1725 to 1807 and is best known as the man who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. But John Newton was a leading English slavery abolitionist. He served as a sailor in the Royal Navy, participated in the slave trade himself, and he was himself enslaved for a time to an African princess, no less, in West Africa.
He apparently was a bit of a libertine and a ruffian, and didn't necessarily get on with the people on ship. So it was a very rough trade, and this particular ship, they decided they'd had enough of him, and they gave him over to the Africans. But slavery, so there was white slavery. White slaves were highly prized in the Ottoman Empire, and the corsairs used to go along the coast, the east coast of Africa, and west coast of Africa and west coast of Europe, even up to Cornwall. There's recordings of them having made slave trading raids into Cornwall in the 16th and 17th century. So it wasn't just the Europeans, but as with everything around that period of time, the Europeans got very sort of industrial scale with it. So their trade was done to another level. But you also have to understand that they didn't go and capture the slaves. That was Africans enslaving other Africans. You know, the Vikings were slavers, and a whole lot of people traded in slaves, and it was a smash and grab. It wasn't having a war with people. You end up with captives. What do you do with a captive? Well, back in the day, you either slaughtered them or you enslaved them. There was a trade. There were people stealing people from other people, and that was part of what was going on in Africa as well. So it's an interesting mixed bag, and it'd be interesting to know some of the people leading the charge for reparations in the US, whether some of their relatives may well have actually in Africa been part of the slave trade as perpetrators, not just victims. You know, it's something that I think everyone needs to look at a lot more closely before we start buying into present day guilt and presentism.
Yeah, Graham Young speaking to me about the British moves to abolish slavery almost 200 years ago at the AIP's Emancipation Day event in Brisbane this week. So the Obamas, after waiting several days, finally came out and endorsed Kamala Harris for President of the United States. Instead of a normal press release, we got this.
Kamala!
Hello. Hi!
Hey there!
Oh, hi, you're both together. Oh, it's good to hear you both. I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We call to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much to me. I am looking forward to doing this with the two of you, Doug and I both, and getting out there, being on the road. But most of all, I just want to tell you the words you have spoken and the friendship that you have given over all these years mean more than I can express. So thank you both. It means so much. And we're going to have some fun with this too, aren't we?
Sorry to put you through that. I hope you haven't thrown up too much. But this cheesy reality TV shtick stuff will work with the all feels no brain crowd. Queensland has its state election a few days before the presidential election in the US. Queensland Premier Stephen Miles decided to get in with the kids with this little video treat of him discussing his great 50-cent public transport idea. This one and only idea he has, it seems. While, wait for it, making a sandwich.
Hi everyone. Well, it's just over a week until all of our public transport becomes 50 cents. As Queensland's new Premier, it was one of the big changes I wanted to make all public transport as cheap as we can, almost free. When I was growing up in Pine Rivers in Petrie, I remember thinking how mad it was that we charged people who travel the furthest. We charge them the most, and they're the ones who otherwise will spend so long on the road creating traffic. I've talked to people who can be spending, 12, 15, 20 bucks a day just on their commute, and this will cut that down to just $1. All of the great cities, they have great rapid public transport, and that's what we're working to build here in southeast Queensland.
And this video will work too. He's relatable. He makes his own sandwiches just like we do. Never mind that they're directly taking us all for fools by bribing us with 50-cent bus and train fares for the election. There's no coincidence that this little handout is kicking in just 3 months before the election and will stop with fares going back to normal 3 months after the election. As it must, because Queensland, like Victoria and most other states, simply can't afford it. The government has to fund this with debt. Yep, you'll be paying for it later, kids. The state is $132 billion with a B dollars in debt. And the interest bill is rising, of course, probably about $6 billion a year now. So yeah, who cares? Just tax those rich bastards even more. That'll work. I will say, though, that public transport is something that gets cheaper to deliver if more people use it, so we might see how this little economic experiment works, I guess. But the Queensland LNP think that they can't lose this election. They are well ahead in the polls, 57 to 43, and the Labor primary vote is at rock bottom levels historically. So the LNP is playing this same small target game that every losing Liberal National Party team that has faced an election in the last few years around Australia has used. And you'll notice that we have every state in the mainland is Labor and federal Labor. Yeah, so it works well, really does. The idea is small target, right? You don't stand for anything very strongly, so you don't upset anybody, right? Nothing actually conservative or liberal. Just say as little as possible and let the other guys lose. And because of the unpopularity of Labor in Queensland right now, the LNP team will likely fall over the line. But voters are fickle, and state elections can be unpredictable. People make their minds up late, and they're easily persuaded by friendly videos of leaders making sandwiches and being all relatable. Palaszczuk is long forgotten in Queensland now. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Kamala's little cheesy video may just be working a bit. The well-respected Morning Consult poll a few days ago, it has a huge sample size of 11,000 voters, has Harris leading Trump slightly overall at 47% to 46%, up 1 percentage point on last week. And that exceeds the highest level of backing that we gauged for Biden ever at 45%. They've also got third-party candidate support dropping, so now just 4% of voters say that they'd vote for someone other than Trump or Harris if the election was held today. That's the smallest share for independents like RFK Jr. And Morning Consult says Harris's popularity is now at a record high. 50% of voters now view Harris favourably. That's up 7 percentage points from 43 just last week. And while 46% hold unfavourable opinions, that's down from 51%, 5 percentage points down. So not all polls, though, are showing the same trend. The latest Harvard poll, taken this week with a sample of 2,200 people, has Harris in exactly the same spot that Biden was before he dropped out. Trump leading Harris by 3 percentage points, 48 to 45. So who knows? It's bloody close. That's all we can say right now. But hopefully Americans will start to wake up that underneath all those nice, cheesy smiles and cackles, Kamala is ideologically very, very dangerous. One Fox News host, US commentator and constitutional law expert Mark Levin, had a pretty scary analysis of Harris's thinking. Coming back to our general theme today about the big and important difference between striving for equality of opportunity in our societies in the West versus equality of outcome, what the radical left calls equity, something that they think terrifyingly should be imposed by a central government.
When you keep talking about equity as the end game, equity is the end game, that's about dehumanizing the individual. This is what totalitarian regimes do. Equity, we got to get to the end game. Everybody's the same. That's the Khmer Rouge. That is Mao. That is sick. So I want you to listen to this. This is Kamala Harris explaining her totalitarian ideology, which is pure Marxism. Not from me, from her.
It has to be about a goal of saying everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Equitable distribution. But we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing.
That's not what equality means, not under our system. Equality means access to equal justice, to human rights, to a just rule of law. It doesn't mean everybody gets the same thing.
That's right. It does not mean everybody gets the same thing. That would actually be terrible. It would result in everyone giving up and not bothering to excel or strive or to be better. More Kamala.
That often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And if you then understand not everybody started out in the same place, you understand some people need more. So we all end up in the same place.
So we all end up in the same... Doesn't this sound like we're all going to end up in a gulag? What the hell does she mean? We're all going to end up in the same place. She's either completely moronic or a hardcore leftist ideologue, and I'm banking on both.
Ah, yes. Nobody puts it quite like the great Mark Levin. Oh, she's both all right.
We are proud of the fact that equity is one of our guiding principles. Proud of the fact that we understand equality is important, but not everybody starts out on the same base. We see that people in our country are having an experience that is not equal. So when we talk about the work we are doing here together, it is recognizing that and being guided by this principle of what we must do in the spirit and in the interest of equity. To put equity firmly at the center of our economic policy.
It goes on and on and on because this is how she speaks. She gets in her head a couple of sentences, and it's not just this, it's other, and she regurgitates it. And it's just over and over and over again to the point of absolute and complete idiocy.
Mark Levin says Kamala Harris doesn't believe in capitalism, freedom, or liberty, and thinks that human nature is something that a central government should control so that we all end up in the same place.
We all end up in the same place, and let's say we don't. Then what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We've seen this play out throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard her. That's a prescription for tyranny and totalitarianism, which leads to horrendous things. She doesn't even embrace the American experiment. She doesn't even know or rejects the founding of America, that it's based on individual liberty. It's not we all end up in the same place. No, we don't all end up in the same place. Some work harder than others, some are smarter than others, some develop things, some create things, some are great athletes, some are not. I mean, this is a dynamic, a vibrant society. We don't all end up in the same place, and that's not the government's job. My God, this woman wants to be president of the United States?
It's a terrifying thought. Nothing threatens the liberal democracy of the United States like this. Certainly not a pragmatic businessman like Donald Trump, for all of his character flaws. This woman is truly terrifying. Sometimes we think that our age is the only age that has seen a big ideological divide between left and right. But there have been threats to individual liberty in the past. Ronald Reagan had a speech that he simply referred to as the speech, which he gave many times during the 1964 presidential election campaign. It was the speech that put him on the radar for the Republican Party as a potential candidate and on the path to the governorship of the state of California and eventually the presidency in the 1980s. I want to play a bit of that speech for you now, because as we listen to the rhetoric and spin coming from Kamala Harris and the Democrats in the lead up to the November election, I think it's really important to remember that tyranny will arrive not with guns and bombs, but with a cheesy smile on its face, dripping in kindness and niceness. That those who seek to rule over us and control us will always do so under the guise of taking care of us or keeping us safe, like a good mummy and daddy and nanny state should. Here's President Reagan in 1964.
And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course.
Ronald Reagan speaking 60 years ago on the campaign trail for the Republican presidential candidate in 1964, a guy named Barry Goldwater. Goldwater lost massively to Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ, most likely because of the assassination of John F. Kennedy the year before. LBJ took over from JFK in 1963, and he was hugely popular at the time. But Reagan's warning is just as relevant today as it was back then, and I want to play you a good 2 minutes more of it now. It's well worth giving the time to. Here we go.
In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or as we were told a few days ago by the President, we must accept a greater government activity in the affairs of the people. But they've been a little more explicit in the past, and among themselves, and all of the things I now will quote have appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 20th century. Senator Fulbright has said at Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader, and he says he is hobbled in his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document. He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best. And Senator Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate spokesman, defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for one, resent it when a representative of the people refers to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. This is a term we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those founding fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy.
Wow. Ronald Reagan speaking back in 1964, 60 years ago. Wouldn't it be good to have leaders of that caliber nowadays? Maybe those old white males aren't so bad after all. One guy who's standing out as very articulate is the vice presidential running mate of Donald Trump, the first millennial to be on a presidential ballot, J.D. Vance. He spoke at a rally this week and reminded everyone about the fundamental lie that Vice President Harris and the Democrats have been telling for the past couple of years.
Maybe the worst and most dishonest thing that Kamala Harris has done, and it is a long list, my friends, is that she helped cover up Joe Biden's declining mental capacity for years. It's actually sad. Putin, Xi, Kim Jong-un, all these dictators, they have been sitting in private rooms for 3.5 years, licking their chops because we have a president who can't actually do the job. Now, anyone who's too blind to see Biden's incompetence or too dishonest to admit it is not fit to serve as commander-in-chief. She lied to us. She lied to all of us, and it's unacceptable.
J.D. Vance also told the crowd that Kamala's ascent to be the presumptive nominee for the Democrats has been a kind of orchestrated coup. Because in America, they have little elections, primaries, and even caucuses to elect their presidential candidates. But this hasn't happened with Harris.
In America, we do not crown our leaders, we vote for them. Democrat or Republican, you gotta give the voters a choice. But if there's one thing we've learned about Kamala Harris, it's that she has a hard time winning votes because she's too extreme even for the Democrat Party. Remember, in the 2020 primary, Harris dropped out months before they even cast the first vote. She was so unpopular, she polled in the low single digits among Democrats the entire campaign. She wasn't even the top 3 in her home state of California, and that is pretty embarrassing, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason is because Democrats know that the American people would never elect a San Francisco liberal who's so far outside the mainstream.
Vance also hit back at claims from Harris that he wasn't loyal to the United States.
I saw the other day Kamala Harris questioned my loyalty to this country. That's the word she used, loyalty. And I'd like to ask the Vice President, what has she done to question my loyalty to this country? I served in the United States Marine Corps. I went to Iraq for this country. I built a business for this country. And my running mate took a bullet for this country. So my question to Kamala Harris is, what the hell have you done to question our loyalty to the United States of America?
J.D. Vance giving a little love back to Kamala Harris at a campaign rally in Minnesota this week. And that's all we have time for this week. On the other side, your weekly summary of the best news and commentary without the woke. Please remember to tell your friends about the show. Please, that is by far the best way to help us out. Also, do please follow us on X and YouTube and smash that like, subscribe, and every other button on all the platforms that you can, especially the little bell. We drop a new show every Friday night at 7 p.m. If you are watching on YouTube, to make sure if you like what we're doing and you want us to continue, please support us a little bit by clicking that $ thanks button and making a super thanks donation. No donation too small, but we do like large ones too, so that we can keep on delivering for you. I'm Damien Curry. Take care. Bye for now.